The early morning light spilled across the valley like liquid gold, but Colton Reeves didn't notice. He stood on his front porch, arms crossed over his chest, staring out at the same peculiar sight he'd been watching for 3 days straight. Dakota was pawing at the same patch of dirt beneath the old birch tree again. Colton narrowed his eyes. The Appaloosa was normally calm, steady, the kind of horse you could count on through rain or fire. But lately, Dakota had become fixated on that single spot. He'd paw, snort, back up, and then return to the same place like he was digging for something. Whatever it was, he wasn't letting it go. "Stubborn as ever," Colton muttered, stepping off the porch, his boots crunching against the dewy grass. He hadn't planned to get involved, not at first. Horses had their moods, but this was different. Dakota wasn't just acting up, he was frantic, focused, intent, as if some instinct deep in his bones told him there was something that didn't belong here, something buried beneath. By the time Colton reached him, Dakota was breathing hard, his flanks damp with sweat despite the crisp Utah air. His hooves had already carved out a shallow trench, and the scent wafting from the disturbed ground made Colton wrinkle his nose. Moldy, damp, like a cellar left shut for decades. "Easy, boy," Colton said, reaching for his horse's neck. But Dakota jerked away and struck the ground again, this time hard enough that a faint metallic clank echoed it up from the soil. Colton froze. He dropped to one knee, fingers combing through the loose dirt. The earth here was soft. Too soft for how dry it had been, like it had been tampered with not long ago. Something had definitely been buried here, and not by accident. His breath caught as he brushed away more earth and uncovered what looked like the edge of a rusted hinge. "Hell," he whispered. He leaned back, scanning the field, remembering something he hadn't thought of in years. The folks who owned this land before him, an old ranching family named the Mayfairs, had sold the place dirt cheap and left town with barely a word. Colton, newly retired from law enforcement and reeling from the death of his wife, hadn't asked many questions. He just needed somewhere quiet to disappear. But now? Dakota let out a low whinny, alert and anxious. Colton reached for the shovel leaning by the fence post and was about to dig deeper when the distant thunder of hooves interrupted him. He looked up sharply. A rider was coming fast from the east, cutting across the valley with the urgency of someone chasing time itself. The horse galloped straight for the birch tree, the woman atop riding with practiced ease. Her long braid streamed behind her like a whip of dark fire. She pulled up hard, dismounting before the dust had even settled. "Tessa?" Colton blinked. Tessa Monroe, the mayor's secretary and daughter of one of Red Hollow's oldest families, looked more rattled than he'd ever seen her. She glanced at the shallow hole, then at Dakota, then at him. "What the hell are you doing, Colton?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "He's been at it for days," Colton said, gesturing to Dakota. "Digging in this exact spot. I figured if he was that persistent, there had to be something under there." Tessa stepped between him and the hole, her face pale. "You shouldn't be digging there." Colton raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" "Because that ground—" She hesitated, swallowing hard. "It holds things that were meant to stay hidden." Dakota struck the earth again, this time with such force that the clank was unmistakable. Tessa flinched, her eyes wide. "What is it you're afraid I'll find, Tessa?" She looked away, gathering herself. Then finally she said, 3 years ago, my brother, Jackson, he disappeared. Said he was working on something, looking into forged land deals around the new railway project. And then, he was gone." Colton's eyes darkened. "I remember. Folks said he skipped town, gold rush fever." "No," she said firmly. "That's what they wanted people to think. But Jackson would have never left without saying goodbye to me. He found something. I know he did, and he told me once." Her voice cracked. "He told me if something happened to him, it'd be tied to this land." Colton glanced down at the ground beneath them. Dakota had stepped back, watching them both, tail twitching like a metronome counting down. "You think he's buried here?" Colton asked, his voice low. "I think he found something he wasn't supposed to. And I think the people who owned this ranch made damn sure no one ever found out what it was." The wind rustled through the tall grass, carrying with it the faintest whisper of rot and rust. Colton bent down again, gripping the handle of the shovel. "Then let's find out." He pushed the shovel into the ground, and Dakota snorted in approval, taking a few paces back as if standing guard. They worked quickly, the silence between them broken only by the scrape of metal on dirt. It didn't take long before the blade of the shovel hit something solid. Colton knelt and cleared away the remaining soil with his hands, revealing a box. Small, iron-bound, and wrapped in oilcloth now frayed with time. He glanced at Tessa, who nodded solemnly. Just as he reached for the box, a new sound rolled over the ridge behind them. Hoofbeats, again, but this time slower, heavier. Tessa's face went white. "Someone's coming." Colton stood and looked toward the hill. A silhouette appeared against the early morning sky, another rider watching them from above. "If they know we've found it," Tessa whispered, stepping closer to Colton, her voice trembling. "We're already in danger." Colton didn't respond. He simply reached for his rifle, leaning on the tree, eyes locked on the rider above, the truth buried beneath his feet, and the past he'd thought he'd left behind now, clawing its way back into the light. Colton didn't sleep that night. The iron box sat on his kitchen table like a curse wrapped in oilcloth, damp earth still clinging to its corners. Dakota was restless in the barn, pawing at his stall and letting out low, uneasy whinnies every few minutes, like he knew the world had shifted somehow, and not for the better. Tessa sat across the table, hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee she'd long forgotten to drink. Her eyes flicked from the box to Colton and back again, as if expecting it to explode at any moment. "You sure we should open it here?" she asked quietly. "No," Colton said. "But I don't much like the idea of waiting for someone to do it for us, either." The memory of that shadowy rider watching them from the ridge still burned in the back of his mind. He'd stayed just long enough to be seen. A warning, maybe, or a threat. Colton reached for the box. The lock was old, simple, and rusted shut, but a couple well-placed taps from a screwdriver cracked it loose. He peeled back the cloth slowly, revealing the lid beneath, then took a breath and opened it. Inside were papers, dozens of them. Folded, curled at the edges, some stained with oil and time. Colton pulled one out, unfolding it carefully. "Railway contracts," he muttered. "Land transfer deeds, all unsigned." Tessa leaned in, scanning the top page. "But look, that's Mayor Lanning's name, and the date. This was filed 2 months before Jackson disappeared." Another document showed a ledger, columns of numbers and initials. "Kickbacks," Tessa said. They were paying off ranchers to abandon their land so the railway company could buy it for dirt cheap and lay tracks through the valley, which would triple the value once the line went through, Colton added grimly. He dug deeper and found something wrapped in wax paper. Photographs, black and white prints, slightly warped by moisture. One showed Jackson Monroe shaking hands with a man Colton recognized instantly. Wade Grissom, the deputy sheriff who'd suddenly retired the same month Jackson vanished. Tessa's voice cracked. They said Jackson ran off with some barmaid to Oregon, but I knew it wasn't true. They covered it up. Colton's jaw tightened. And now we've got the proof. But proof came with danger. A thud sounded against the front porch. Something light but deliberate. Colton's hand shot to the old revolver under the table as he moved to the window. He pushed the curtain aside just enough to peek out. Nothing. Then he opened the door and found it. A crow feather, black as pitch, pinned to his doorframe with a rusty nail. Colton didn't need a translation. It was the symbol of the Raven Hollow Riders, a group of ex-cons and thugs hired as muscle by land developers in nearby counties. He'd seen their work before. Barns burned to the ground, livestock poisoned, warnings that always came before someone got accidentally run off the road. "They know we found the box," he said, voice low, "and they want us to shut up." Tessa stood in the doorway behind him, her face pale in the moonlight. "What do we do now?" "We dig deeper, quietly, and we figure out who's still alive and still playing dirty." They spent the next day sorting through the papers, creating a timeline, cross-referencing names with county records. A pattern started to emerge. The land swap scam stretched back 5 years. Names on the documents included ranchers who'd sold out under pressure, and a few who had simply disappeared. At the center of it all was one familiar name: Weston Greaves. Greaves owned the largest cattle outfit in the state, and was also the lead investor in the Red Valley Railway expansion. He'd never set foot in Red Hollow himself, but everyone knew his money touched half the businesses in town. Colton leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "This isn't just corruption. This is a damn machine." Tessa nodded. "And Jackson tried to take it down by himself." That night, Colton drove out to the edge of town under the cover of darkness. He parked behind the old feed store, locked the box in his truck, and ducked into a dive bar lit by neon signs and stale cigarette smoke. He wasn't there for a drink. He was there for information. Seated at the end of the bar was Eddie Hawk Ramirez, a former informant Colton had once saved from a prison sentence. Now he ran a trucking outfit and had his ear to the ground in every dusty corner of Utah. "You look like hell, Reeves," Hawk said, not looking up from his beer. "Appreciate the honesty," Colton replied. "I need to know if the Raven Hollow boys are working this side of the valley." Hawk's eyes narrowed. "You stirred up something, didn't you?" "Yeah," Colton said, "and it's only going to get worse." Hawk hesitated, then leaned in. "I heard chatter. A couple of their riders came through last week. One of them, Devlin Chase, said they had a job that needed to stay quiet. That usually means someone's about to go missing." Colton felt the weight settle heavier on his chest. "Thanks, Hawk. Whatever you're digging into, Reeves, be careful. This town might look quiet, but there's a whole damn viper pit under the surface." Back at the ranch, Dakota was pacing again. The Appaloosa pawed the dirt behind the barn, ears flicking toward the dark ridgeline beyond. Colton joined him, scanning the horizon. Out there, just past the trees, he saw a flicker of movement. A shadow too large to be an animal, too slow to be wind. Someone was watching. And this time, they weren't alone. The morning came thick with fog, blanketing the ranch in a damp silence that made every creak of wood and scrape of hoof feel louder. Colton stood in the barn doorway, cup of black coffee steaming in his hand, watching Dakota pace the paddock like a soldier on patrol. Something in the air had changed, and not just the weather. "Colt," Tessa called from the porch. She held a folded newspaper, her eyes wide with alarm. "You need to see this." The headline hit him like a punch. "Local ranch hand dies in mysterious barn fire." Arson suspected, Raven Hollow riders questioned. The photo beneath was grainy but familiar. Beau Lantry, a wiry young man who'd once worked with Jackson Monroe and helped Colton break Colts back in the day. Beau was the kind of guy who wouldn't hurt a fly. A loner, yes, but not someone who made enemies. Unless he knew something. Unless someone thought he might talk. Colton clenched his jaw. They're tying up loose ends. Tessa exhaled shakily. How long before we're on that list? Not long. That night, Colton took a long ride with Dakota into the southern hills, following the back trails that twisted through the forest. He needed air, space, time to think, and maybe a little hope that not everyone in town had sold their soul. He stopped at a familiar clearing, the old training ring Jackson had built years ago, tucked away behind a line of evergreens. It hadn't seen a rider in years, but the fencing was still mostly intact. Colton dismounted and let Dakota graze while he walked the perimeter. That's when he heard it. A sharp rustle. Not animal, too heavy. He spun, drawing the revolver from his hip. Who's there? A figure stepped out from behind the trees. Not a rider, a woman. Mid-30s, jeans dusted in trail dirt, a worn Stetson pulled low. Her eyes were sharp, her stance confident. "Easy," she said. "Name's Riley Ward. I'm not here to rob you." Colton didn't lower the gun, not yet. "Then what are you here for?" She tossed something toward his feet. It hit the dirt with a soft thud. A photo, folded and cracked down the middle. It was Jackson, standing beside Riley. "I was his fiancée," she said quietly, "until he disappeared." Colton blinked. Jackson never mentioned. He didn't tell many people. Said the fewer who knew, the safer it'd be. We were going to get married after he exposed Greaves and the whole damn land scam, but he got too close. Colton holstered the revolver slowly. "And now you're back?" Riley nodded. "Because I heard you found the box, and because if Greaves is cleaning house, I figure my time's limited too." They sat by the old ring for nearly an hour as Riley laid it all out. The day Jackson went missing, the threats he'd received, how he'd hidden copies of files with trusted friends, including Beau. "They killed Beau to send a message," she said. "And the message is, keep your head down or lose it." Colton felt something rise in him, not fear, not even anger, resolve. "We're not backing down," he said. Riley smirked. "Good, because I've still got one piece they didn't find." From her saddlebag, she pulled out a flash drive, sealed in a plastic bag. Video footage. Jackson recorded a meeting with Greaves and the sheriff. Blackmail, bribes, the whole ugly mess. Colton stared at it like it was a live wire. "You're telling me this thing could blow the whole case open?" "If we can get it to someone who will act on it." The problem was, the sheriff was bought. The mayor was worse, and anyone who might have helped had either been silenced or scared off. Tessa met them at the ranch later that night, the drive in hand, her face pale. "You need to see this," she whispered. Colton plugged the drive into his laptop. The screen flickered to life. Jackson sat in a hotel room, camera angled discreetly toward the doorway. Greaves entered first, broad-shouldered, smug. Sheriff Kilpatrick followed, removing his hat. "You're either in or you're out, Jackson," Greaves said on screen. "And if you're out, we make sure you stay out." Jackson's voice was low. "You're threatening me." "No," Kilpatrick said. "We're promising you. You print one word of this and no one will find your body. We've buried better men than you." The video ended in static. No one said a word for a long moment. Then Tessa finally broke the silence. "We have to go public. They'll come after us the second we try," Riley said. "Then we don't give them the chance," Colton muttered. "We leak it anonymously, multiple sources. Force it out in the open. The press, the state authorities, hell, even the Bureau if we have to. But before that, Riley said, we need to draw them out. Make them think they've won. Colton nodded slowly, eyes dark with calculation. I've got a plan. As the three of them talked long into the night, Dakota stood in the paddock beneath the moonlight, eyes fixed on the horizon. And out there, in the dark beyond the hills, the Raven Hollow riders were already saddling up. The final act was coming, and Red Hollow would never be the same again. Red Hollow simmered under a steel-gray sky, the air so still it felt like the world was holding its breath. Colton knew that feeling. He'd felt it in Afghanistan right before an ambush. Now, it lingered like smoke over his family ranch. They had a plan. They also had no time to waste. Are you sure about this?" Tessa asked, her voice low, as she handed Colton the burner phone. "Greaves thinks I'm just a washed-up vet and some damn saddle-bum. It's time we remind him who he's dealing with." Across the table, Riley loaded the last of the flash drives into padded envelopes. "These are going to every local and state journalist I could find. TV, podcasts, bloggers, even some DC watchdog groups." Colton nodded. "We do it tonight, before they smell us coming." Just before dusk, Riley drove into town with Tessa riding shotgun. They dropped off the packages one by one, masked under takeout deliveries and thrift store drop-ins. Meanwhile, Colton rode Dakota along a back trail that led straight to the Raven Hollow Riders base camp, an old abandoned mill deep in the pines. He knew they'd be there, knew Greaves would come, and he brought a message. When Colton stepped into the clearing, the riders were already waiting. Flint, tall and rangy with eyes like glass. Maddox, the muscle. And finally, Greaves himself, leaning against a gleaming silver F-150 like he owned the forest. "Well, hell," Greaves said, smiling like a rattlesnake. "Look who decided to crawl out of his barn." Colton didn't flinch. "Thought I'd stop by, say goodbye." Maddox sneered. "You got a death wish, Creed?" "I got nothing left to lose." Greaves stepped forward, boots crunching pine needles. "We warned you. Told you to stay quiet. You've got no idea the kind of people backing me." "Doesn't matter anymore," Colton said, lifting his phone, "because by the time this call ends, the entire state will have copies of what Jackson recorded, the bribes, the threats, the names." Greaves's smile faltered. "You're bluffing. Try me." A long beat passed before Flint suddenly stepped forward, drawing his sidearm. But before the gun cleared the holster, a sharp crack echoed through the trees. A warning shot. From the ridge above, Sheriff Rayner stepped out, rifle slung tight, flanked by two deputies. "You boys might want to lower your weapons," Rayner said. "You're on federal land, and I've got the Attorney General on the line." Greaves turned pale. "What the hell?" "Colton's not bluffing," Riley called from behind a tree, stepping out with a camera crew. "Smile, Mr. Greaves. You're on live stream." Chaos erupted. Maddox ran. Flint tossed his gun. Greaves lunged at Colton, fist swinging. But Dakota reared between them, hooves slamming the dirt, forcing the man back. "You're finished," Colton growled, pinning Greaves with a knee as Rayner slapped cuffs on his wrists. "People like me don't go down," Greaves snarled. "Yeah?" Colton stood. "Then we'll drag you." That night, the town of Red Hollow lit up. News vans rolled in. Headlines exploded. "Illegal land racket exposed in Wyoming missing journalists' evidence. Sparks statewide investigation." Greaves, Flint, Maddox, all arrested. Sheriff Kilpatrick vanished before dawn, leaving behind nothing but an empty office and a smoking safe. Colton returned to the ranch, bone-tired and dust-covered, but lighter than he'd felt in years. Inside the barn, Dakota waited. Tessa stood at the stall door, her voice soft. He knew, didn't he? Jackson, that you'd be the one to finish this. Colton didn't answer at first. He stroked Dakota's muzzle, watching the horse breathe calm again after so much storm. He always believed in second chances, Colton finally said. Guess this one's ours. Behind them, Riley unfolded the last piece of the puzzle, Jackson's final journal. Inside were sketches, coordinates, and a letter addressed to whoever makes it out alive. It ended with a single line. Don't just expose them, replace them. Rebuild what they tried to destroy. Colton looked out at the hills beyond the pasture. Smoke from Greaves' lies finally cleared. But the work wasn't done. The land was still healing. So were the people. But for the first time in a long time, Red Hollow had a chance to be whole. And Colton Creed, broken soldier, stubborn rancher, unlikely hero, was ready to help rebuild it. The sun rose over Red Hollow, soft and golden, casting long shadows across the courthouse lawn. 2 black SUVs with tinted windows were parked by the steps. Judge Redburn, pale and tight-lipped, was led out in cuffs, followed closely by Travis Lang, his face a mix of shame and fury. Federal agents flanked them as they were loaded into the vehicles, the quiet murmurs of townsfolk watching from a distance. Colton stood across the street, his Stetson pulled low, Dakota at his side. The horse was calm, almost regal, as if he too understood the weight of what had passed. They're really gone, Roz whispered, stepping up beside him with her notepad clutched tight. Justice. It actually happened. Colton didn't smile. He just nodded once, eyes still fixed on the fading silhouettes of the cars. They buried the truth long enough, he said. Jackson dug it up, with a little help. By midweek, copies of Jackson Monroe's journal and evidence were on their way to the office of the Inspector General. The corrupt land deals were frozen, and teams of auditors began combing through records that hadn't seen daylight in decades. Federal subpoenas followed like falling dominoes. Meanwhile, Roz's paper hit the stands with the headline that screamed across every porch, "Truth Unearthed at Red Hollow." And for the first time in years, people didn't look over their shoulders when they spoke. Elias Talltree was invited to speak at the community center. The gymnasium was packed. Farmers, ranchers, elders, even teenagers who usually had little interest in history. He stood tall in a navy shirt embroidered with traditional Cherokee motifs, his silver-streaked braid over one shoulder. Our stories were never lost, Elias said. They were just waiting for someone to listen. Tessa sat in the front row, hands folded in her lap. Next to her, a teacher from the local school was taking notes. Plans for a new curriculum on indigenous land rights and town history were already being drafted. Oh, at the heart of it all stood a single white birch tree on Colton's land. That Sunday, the town gathered beneath its rustling leaves. A flat granite stone had been placed there, engraved simply, "Even if I fall, truth will rise. And maybe someone else will carry it further than I ever could. Jackson Monroe." Tessa stood with Roz and Elias, reading aloud the words, her voice thick with emotion. "He never got to see this," she said quietly, wiping her cheek. But maybe he didn't need to. He believed someone would keep going. Colton stepped forward, removed his hat, and placed it over his heart. "He carried the weight of truth longer than most could bear," he said. "Now we carry it for him." In the weeks that followed, Colton made a quiet but monumental decision. He sold off the northern acres of his ranch, land that had once been under dispute, and used the funds to launch a nonprofit, the Monroe Foundation for Land Justice. Its mission was simple: support legal aid for small landowners and tribal communities facing wrongful seizure. Dakota, the horse who'd pawed at the earth and revealed history's bones, became more than a legend. Children would visit the ranch just to touch his mane, believing he could sense truth. He'd stand patiently as little hands brushed his side and whispered their hopes into his ear. One afternoon, as the barn doors creaked open to let in the breeze, Tessa stood in the tack room holding Jackson's journal. She had begun writing again, this time a book. Its title, The Horse Who Dug the Truth. Roz offered to help edit, while Elias provided footnotes and oral histories. Each chapter braided together past and present like strands of barbed wire and wind. At the town's autumn festival, Elias stood on the makeshift stage with a microphone and steady eyes. "Land forgets many footsteps," he said, "but it always remembers those who bleed for it." That evening, as the fair wound down, a boy with freckles and a wide-brimmed hat rode up on a pony, pulling reins beside Colton. "Sir?" he asked, wide-eyed. "Is it true your horse saved the whole town?" Colton looked down, smiled faintly, and ran a hand along Dakota's neck. "He just listened," he said, "when no one else would." The boy beamed like he'd just shaken hands with a folk hero. As the sun sank low behind the hills, painting the fields in amber and fire, Colton, Tessa, and Roz stood on the front porch of the house that had once been Jackson's. The white birch shimmered in the distance, its bark catching the last light of day. Dakota ambled up the hill and stopped beside them. Without a word, he pressed his head gently into Colton's shoulder. Tessa leaned into Roz. "Do you think he knows what he did?" Roz smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe he just did what was right." A quiet wind swept across the fields, lifting the scent of dry earth and old wood. No sirens, no headlines, just a silence that felt like peace. A voice, soft and sure, could almost be heard on that breeze. Justice doesn't always ride in with sirens. Sometimes it gallops in quietly, one hoof at a time,